And the people made a covenant with God. And of course, they broke it. But he said, that's not what we've come to. We've come to something far greater. Because could they go up on the mountain? Could they touch the mountain? Could they even listen to God's voice? No. And so for all practical purposes, was God approachable? No. And the old covenant was weak in that way because it made no man perfect. There was no forgiveness of sins. And he says, but that's not what we've come to. We've come to something so much far better. And we won't spend the time talking about it, even though it's worthy of it. In verse 22, but he says, you have come to Mount Zion. And that's this heavenly mountain, resemblance of it. It's speaking of the type that is on earth, of course, where Jerusalem was. To the city of the living God, he calls it the heavenly Jerusalem. To myriads of angels, of course, angels were present in the giving of the old law. To the general assembly in the church of the firstborn. So that's everyone that has been faithful in the Old Testament that were redeemed by the blood of the Lamb. Who would that include? Just give me some names real quickly. Noah, David. I want a lady's name. Sarah. Rahab the harlot. Deborah. All right. All these people, they've been transferred into God's kingdom when Christ died on the cross and defeated Satan and rendered him powerless, him who had the power of death. That was Hebrews 2, right? And so there's the general assembly. Now, everyone that was born into Christ by becoming baptized when the gospel was being preached became part of his church, this ecclesia of the firstborn. Who's that a reference to? Jesus, the firstborn from the dead. Is he the firstborn born? Because there are some denominations, Jesus is a created being. He was a firstborn born. No. Firstborn means the highest of all. Psalms 89. Okay? He's the King of Kings is what he is. He has all authority. And so everyone since the Pentecost that became a Christian and now their body is in the grave or in dust or in the sea or burned to ashes or in a lion's throat. Where are all those people? Give me some names quickly. No. From Pentecost forward. Because we already dealt with the ones in the Old Testament. Stephen. All the apostles. Philip. Timothy. Rosemary Hafer. I'm not dead yet, please. If you can't get here on time, you won't know what's going on. But we're being serious. No. Hewlin, that's right. Your mom. I mean, we're talking about all those people, aren't we? He said, that's who you've come to, and they all have access to God. In the old, no access. He wasn't approachable. But now we have this new and living way that we can appeal to him every day on this earth, crying, Abba, Father. And when we die, it even gets better because we're transported to his very presence. And so that's what he says we've come to. Now, do you want to go back? He's asking these Hebrew Christians. There's nothing to go back to because this is so much better. Thank you. So he says then, verse 24, you become to the mediator of a new covenant and to sprinkle blood, which speaks better than that of Abel. And so that's where we left off. But notice there's 5 more verses that we have to cover. And so when we look at this, we're going to see, we went through 2. There's nothing more God's going to reveal. And that's why he's been silent. And if we don't get this, there's nothing left. All right? It's all about this great gospel. Yes?
Is that specifically then referring back to Jesus?
Yes.
Don't refuse Jesus.
Well, it'd be God speaking through him, probably, to be more technically correct. All right? Because if they didn't escape when they refused him when he warned them on the earth, that'd be a reference to the Old Testament. So it has to be Jehovah, right? How much less are we going to escape? And the answer is what? You're not. In Hebrews 10, he says there's a terrifying expectation of judgment if you don't live faithfully, if you don't continue to follow him. And so if you turn away, there's nothing, all right? And so he says, his voice shook the earth then. What was he speaking of? Mount Sinai, because it did quake, all right? That was just a mountain, singular, right? But yet once, he says, I will shake not only the earth, but also the heavens. There's a day's coming when God says, that's going to be it for everything. This expression, yet once more, denotes the removing of those things which can be shaken as created things. So what does that include? Give me answers. Heaven, the moon, the universe, sun, everything. Every created thing. Governments, right? All right? So that those things which cannot be shaken may remain. What would that include? Give me answers. Heavenly Zion, right? Jerusalem, heavenly Jerusalem. The church of the firstborn, right? Yes?
I read some people commenting on this that saying the first shaking was not Sinai, but was the flood.
All right.
Judgment was pronounced.
Yes. And some have suggested, too, that the second shaking could be destruction of Jerusalem. All right? And we're not going to go down that path because that's an interesting study in itself. But it's very possible because what's the last thing that has to be done with the old law for the new covenant to be fully in place and no more competition? Jerusalem has to be destroyed. There's no more high priest. There's no more sacrifice. And it's ceased to this day. It all ended. That's God put his sign, seal, and deliver. It's over. And it took 37 years between the introduction of the church in AD 33 until the destruction of Jerusalem, where there's this transition period from the old to new. And there's a competition between the Jews and Christians. Who's the real people of God? And in the end, who won, if you would? Well, Christians, because they are, that's the new covenant, huh?
God did.
Yeah, God won, all right? So he says, since we receive a kingdom which cannot be shaken. Why can it not be shaken? Yes. That's the answer, because of its location. Jesus said, my kingdom is not of this earth. It's a spiritual one. The throne's not on earth where it's subject to be overtaken. The throne is in heaven. To shake God's kingdom, what would you have to do? You'd have to somehow get there. Now, how many angels are we in the presence of? Millions, perhaps, millions. Archangels that could, with one word, slay 185,000. So if you could find your way there to heaven, then you'd have to somehow overpower God and all the angels and all the living creatures and Jesus Christ. Not going to happen. And the assurance is how sure your hope is. Because where's our anchor? It's in heaven, drawing us up. There's no way you cannot go to heaven. It's not possible for you not to make it if you just pay close attention. Isn't that what it says? Just don't drift away. Keep listening. Keep striving. Run that race. And that's our hope. Now, since we got a kingdom that can't be shaken, here is the appropriate response in one word. Let us show gratitude. Now, what's gratitude? It's an attitude, yes. Thankfulness, but what kind of thankfulness? That's right. Aw. All right, so birthday time. And so I've got some interesting gifts for my wife for my birthday, but I've given her some interesting ones too. So if she's expecting a trip, maybe a new car, or maybe there's one time she wanted a horse, and I get her a vacuum cleaner.
Good choice.
Might she be thankful?
She would, because she is a great woman.
But would she be grateful? Would she be grateful?
You might be dead, but she would be great.
All right.
You might as well buy her some bathrooms.
That's right. I could have bought this for myself, right? Gratitude is, it's this sense of appreciation and thankfulness when you're given something you can't get for yourself generally. Something's done for you that you wouldn't do for yourself or you're incapable of doing for yourself. So he tells people we're internally grateful. When do we say that? When they did something for us that we do all the time for ourselves? It's way above and over and beyond. And so when we understand what God has given to us, adoption as sons, and we're going to have eternal glory in heaven, the only appropriate attitude is this overwhelming gratefulness. Now, I'm mindful of the little parable Jesus told about a man that owed his masters millions of dollars. It wasn't millions, but in his day, that's the way we describe it. And he says, pay me up everything or I'm throwing you in jail. And the guy, what did he do? Begged for. And so his master had to change him. I said, tell you what, I'll just forgive you the whole sum. Millions. Just forgave it. So let's just call it good. So he went out, though, and found another fellow, say it was Brian, who owed him $10,000. Now, how much was he forgiven? Millions. And he says, pay me now. He says, I'll pay you next week as soon as my wife sells her car. And he said, no, pay me now or I'm throwing you in jail. He says, please. And he begs for mercy, but the guy says no and throws him in jail. Now, the original master hears about him, and what does he say? You ungrateful wretch. God hates, ungratitude. Because it's like you deserve the forgiveness of millions? No. And if you received it, millions, what's the least you could do for this person who owed you just 10? Forgive them. Is there something wrong with that person? So he says, you're going to be thrown in jail until you pay every last cent. Now, when is he going to be able to pay that in jail? Millions. He'll be there forever. Right? God wants to see gratefulness. All right, yes.
The gratitude that he's speaking of here too, it produces an attitude of service that you want to do all that you can do.
Exactly.
In service to him for what he's done for you.
It's the only way, well said, the only way we can reciprocate. If God's done this for me, the least I can do is the same for you. Because what he did for me is always going to be greater than what I'm asked to do for you. Did you have your hand up? I'm sorry.
Just looking at the Greek word there is charis or charis.
That's the word grace comes from. Yeah, good point. And so you've been graced. Show little grace towards God. It's praise or joy. And then show grace to others. And it's all going to be a roundabout. So because when you have gratitude, what are you able to do? Offer acceptable service. Now, this is a throwback to the illusion of the Jews that are offering sacrifices to God always, right? Constantly. But he says, I'm sick of your sacrifices. Why was he sick of the Jewish sacrifices? Yeah, there was sin in their life. They weren't grateful. They weren't following God. And they were doing it out of just ritual. He says, you can, though, offer sacrifice to God that he'll accept, he'll be pleased with. And what has to be there for it to be acceptable? Gratitude. There's this heart of joy and just, what can I do for you, Lord? So someone forgives Brian $10 million. And he says, what can I do for you? What's the answer? To pay for that $10 million, what can he do? Nothing. All he can do is say thank you. There's nothing he can do. Well, I would do anything. Okay, here I have one thing. Just treat others the way I just treated you. That's right. Now, can he do that? Yeah. And that's what God is asking. And we're going to see in chapter 13 these acts of service that he's asking us to do. He's going to give us a bullet list of them. Boom, boom, boom. And if we approach them as a checklist of ritual, and I do these, I get to heaven, we missed it because there's got to be an attitude of gratitude. If the heart's not in it, and it's not just willing, I'll do anything for you, then don't do them at all because they won't be acceptable. And a lot of people approach worship and they approach it through a whole Christian walk that way, It's like, I have to. And God says, no, I want you because you want to, because of gratitude. You get Hebrews. This amazing kingdom we've come to. Yes?
A lesson I mentioned earlier, my grandfather taught us as kids. He'd come and he'd do things for us. And every time he did it for us, he'd always say, it'll cost you.
Yeah.
I didn't know what it meant then, but what it meant was later on, I'm going to need to pay that, as they say in vernacular, pay
To
it
somebody
forward
else.
to someone
That's nice. And exactly what it is. Yes. All right. So he says, we may offer to God an acceptable service with reverence and awe. Reverence for him and awe of what he's done. And it's truly genuine, authentic from the heart. Because our God is a consuming fire. So I would love to talk about this, but I want to get to verse 13. All right? Or chapter 13, verse 1. So he says, let love of the brethren continue. Then notice, do not neglect to show hospitality to strangers. Verse 3, remember the prisoners. Verse 4, let marriage be held in honor. Verse 5, let your character be free from love of money. Verse 7, remember those who led you and spoke the word of you. Verse 9, don't be carried away by various strange doctrines. Verse 12 or 11, no, it's 15. Let us continue to offer up a sacrifice of praise to God. That's the fruit of lips. Verse 16, don't neglect doing good and sharing. With such sacrifice, God is pleased. Are these offerings? Yeah. And then verse 17, obey your leaders, submit to them. So it's just this bullet list of all these things. There are acceptable offerings or sacrifices to God that we do out of gratitude. And he says, yeah, there's something you can do for me. You be my hands on this earth, all right? You do for others what I've done for you. And it's all out of gratitude. So we're going to look at these things one by one. We won't go get through all of them because some of them are quite involved. But first of all, he says, let the love of the brethren continue, all right? Can you guess what the love of the brethren, there's one word that it comes from? Can you guess what it is? All right, good. Some people can't read that far, though. Philadelphia. How do you spell that? And it's very close to the Greek. Because if you see it, it's Philadelphia, and it's really a fondness or love of the brothers. All right? And so the first thing he says, if you have gratitude for what God has done for you, guess what? He's done it for Bruce, and he's done it for Patty, and he's done it for Ann. You're all in this together. We're brothers and sisters. So the first thing he says, I want you to show this same love for one another. Let the love of the brother continue. Now that implies some things, doesn't it? It implies that love already exists, doesn't it? For it to continue, doesn't that imply it's already been going on? Now, but love between us is a precarious thing. It's easily destroyed. Their division and strife can enter in a church family just like that. So his first exhortation is, you make sure the love of the brother, each one exercise it for one another. It does exist. And true love never quits. In that 1 Corinthians 13, it bears all things, believe all things. Love never goes away. It never quits. It endures all things. And then thirdly, we could say, it's really an evidence of a heavenly citizenship. Because if we're looking for a heavenly home, because we're not content on this earth anymore, and we're citizens of a heavenly kingdom who loved us, and he rules and reigns in love, when we love others, that's evidence of our citizenship. Do you understand that? We've been born of a heavenly Father. 1 John chapter 4, verse 7, it says, God is love, and everyone who's been born of God or knows God, what? Loves like God. It's proof that you're his children. So that's why he says, let it continue, all right? Now, it's interesting. Sometimes we emphasize knowledge appropriately, but it can't be knowledge exclusively. What did Paul say in 1 Corinthians 8? Love, or knowledge by itself, just puffs you up. So in this chart, as your knowledge increases, something should increase with it, and it's love. And if you don't see them growing together, you're just getting puffed up. But knowledge about God and what he's done for us and what the truth is should make us more like God, so we start loving like him, like he loved us. And if they don't grow together, we have to watch out. Something's wrong. Either we're not growing, or we're not learning, or we're learning without doing. Right? And there could be some other scenarios. But it's very serious, okay? So now let's look at these things. He's going to talk about hospitality, about prisoners, love in marriage, love for teachers, for leaders, doctrine, suffering, sacrifice. Leaders I got there twice. That one should be teachers. But in all these, what are we going to show? I have to. No, we're showing what? Gratitude. That's very important. We always remember this because some of these things, at first saying, I don't like doing that. Well, we need to look in our heart and just consider what God did for us. And then hopefully that'll change our attitudes, okay? And so let's look at the first one. This is all really about showing love for one another. So he says in verse 2, do not neglect to show hospitality to strangers. For by this some have entertained angels without knowing it. Now let's don't get caught up with the angels part. Let's start with the do not neglect to show hospitality to strangers. Now there's a word here that is very similar to this because it has the idea of love, because that's Delphi, love. Here it is, love. Here, this is a brother, Delphi, that's a brother. This word we're seeing here has the same root word, philo, and then it has xenos. And so it's a love, and you know what a xenos is? Or xenos? People, but more technically, a stranger. So what's xenophobia, they say? Fear of strangers, and they're using it in our political climate of people that are immigrating because they're different than us, so we have a fear of them. They claim you're xenophobic, right? It's the Greek word here, a stranger. Here he says, I want you to have love for him. We have it two words, don't neglect to show hospitality to strangers, but the word hospitality is literally love of strangers, all right? So when we look at that, there it is, philo, and then xenos, the strangers. We think hospitality is having a brunch or a potluck to feed people we already know and love. Isn't that what hospitality is pretty much today? In their day, that's not what it meant. All right? So, they didn't have Hotel 6s, and they didn't have hostels. And to go to an inn was usually a dirty place and often full of corruption because, immorality took place in those inns. So, it is in many parts of the world, even to this day, when a stranger comes in town, you open your home to them and you receive them and you take care of them, you feed them, and you let them sleep there. You make them feel welcome because they're a stranger. That's a love of a stranger. That's true Bible hospitality, all right? It's taking people in that are strangers to you. Now, we'll talk about that in a couple things. Paul said in Romans 12 that you make sure you contribute to the needs of the saints, practicing hospitality. And he's thinking the same thing. When people come to you and they're Christians and you don't know them, take care of them. And then also, when there's opportunity to take care of Christians in other lands, and they're like famine, what did they do? They sent them money. That's hospitality still, all right? But it had to be open in your home. Now, when the disciples went out on the limited commission, what did Jesus say? Bring a bag of money and a staff and extra shoes? What did he say? Bring nothing. But what did he say? What are you going to say? Whoever receives you, stay at that house. That's hospitality. And if they don't receive you, dust off your feet in protest, and it's going to be really bad for them in the day of judgment because Christ has visited them and they turned them away. That's what he's talking about here. That was the norm. All right, so go ahead.
I experienced it now 20, almost 30 years ago. I was new job, So I called the local congregation, just can I have a ride? And they provided me a ride, but they didn't just provide me a ride. They then took me to lunch, showed me the sights, took me around, and that whole day, I didn't have to need a bed that night because I had a hotel, but
Yeah.
that whole day then, without my asking.
Isn't that nice? And everyone has stories like that. When you were there with Esther, with your brother, the church there took you in, took care of him, and helped financially. Didn't even know you guys. All they knew is that you were brothers in Christ.
That's correct.
Isn't that amazing? That's hospitality to strangers. Now, should we get together and feed our stomachs when we just, yes. We're talking about when someone comes here and they're a new Christian or they've moved this area, we should swarm and embrace them. Have them over their house, make our house their house. Like, I've never met such a loving group. They don't know me, but they offered me the car drive. They keep feeding me. They have me over their house. They let me stay there for a month until I found my own house. That happened to me. I stayed with Christians I didn't know until I could find my own place. That's what? Hospitality. Yes, Marvin.
I just want to make certain, when you were talking about strangers, in today's world, we're talking about only with the Christians or the whole world?
Thank you for asking that. It's a great question. This starts with Christians, because that's the whole context. Because when you get to prisoners here, it's not going to be prisoners in jail because they were a mass murderer. It's going to be prisoners that are in jail because of their faith. So a lot of people are losing their jobs, are being persecuted, going from town to town to run for persecution. And what does Paul say? Show them hospitality. Well, maybe you're struggling yourself. Show them hospitality. Now, secondarily, we're going to apply it to anybody. But especially, it starts right here, to brethren. Right.
Epistles do good unto all men, but
Especially. That's right.
Well, it reminds me of that 10-minute rule that we started a while back when after services, you meet with those visitors that are here. Many of those very visitors that are here are not Christian.
That's right.
They have not obeyed the gospel. But you talking to them, inviting them to lunch, befriending them is one of the biggest things you can do to show what we're all about.
And many have said, I can't believe it. I was invited to lunch. They paid for my lunch. And where'd you go? Chinese. And and then some people said, I just didn't really feel comfortable going, but I was very impressed that I was asked. And some of them are Christians to this day because they were asked. So all I'm going to say is continue to excel still more. Keep doing what you're doing, and the rest of us do it as well. Have them to your home, right? It makes a big difference, all right? Big, big difference. All right, so entertained means to receive as a guest. To entertain, that's the word here. Now we'll look at this. Some have entertained angels and didn't even know it. I'm sorry? That's right. Now, that's probably allusion to Genesis 18 when God approached Abraham talking about a son. 3 men appeared to him, the form of a man. And then in chapter 19, when Lot is in Sodom and Gomorrah, angels appeared to him as men. Now, did they know they were angels? Perhaps Lot did, but we don't always know. Matthew chapter 25, Jesus says, when you do it to the least of these, cup of water, clothing them, that's hospitality, isn't it? You've done it to me. That's gratitude. He's clothed us with righteousness in heaven. I'm just asking you to give him a garment and a piece of bread. See, it's so little compared to what he's done for us, right? So that's what he's asking. It's interesting, in Acts 16, this is Lydia. When you can't read that because the colors are bad, sorry. When she and her household had been baptized, remember Lydia's story? She was down Paul caught up with her down the river. She was a seller of purple, and they were a place of prayer. After they're all become Christians, she begged and urged, saying, if you have judged me to be faithful to the Lord, come into my house and stay. And she prevailed upon him. What does that mean? She wasn't going to let him leave town without coming over and staying. So he stayed. What is that? Hospitality. The least I can do after you saved or help get me saved is have you stay in my house. It'd be a blessing to have you stay there. Is that gratitude? Yeah, Did she feel like she had to? No, she prevailed upon him. In Luke chapter 14, Jesus says, don't invite people over to your house who are just going to return and do the same for you. Invite people, do good for people that have no way of repaying you. Because that's what God's done for you. That's gratitude. Right? And so that's what motivates us. Any questions about that? Yes, Brian.
Well, kind of a question. Is there anything here that indicates that this was only for a limited time, like during the time of Abraham and Lot? In other words, could we have...
Oh, the angels
could
visiting?
we have entertaining
Yeah.
anywhere in our lifetime? I guess is my question.
Okay, it's a good question, and we could spend the rest of the class talking about it. But my answer is going to be, guess what? I don't know. But if you want to speculate, have angels appeared before and people didn't know who they were? Well, it just says that. It just says that. So are angels still being dispatched from heaven to work, render service for those who inherit eternal life? Well, we read that in Hebrews. So is it possible, is what you're asking, can an angel take a human form and be among us and we wouldn't even know it? I guess so. But guess what? You wouldn't know it. He does say Satan's angels or servants disguise themselves as... That's right. Now, is that angels becoming like men, or is it just he's recruiting men to become his servants? Probably the latter. But we'll probably get to heaven. Now, I'm closing my Bible because this is pure speculation. And we're going to be amazed. Like, you mean you were an angel? And I thought, oh, wow. Do you think that's possible?
Yeah, it's very possible.
I just don't know. Yes.
The one I worry about is you meet him and go, hi, I'm stupid, I was one in front of you in the street the other day.
Yeah, and I said, get away from me, bum. Yeah.
Or driver,
Yeah.
So just don't do it.
That's right.
How many have I cut off?
How many of you cut off? How many tried to help you and said, no, I got this? Right?
How many of them were you honking at from behind because they were blocking your way, but they were keeping you from getting up into whatever would have happened to you?
All right. So this discussion is really going. All right. But we have to be aware, because he throws that in there not because it's purely hypothetical. I think it's reality. And you have to understand, we're working in a spiritual realm, not in the physical. And when you do it, you're doing it for the Lord. That's a spiritual. And it's always spiritual. Everything's a spiritual decision, a spiritual act. So now he says, verse 3, remember. Now, I highlight remember because that implies what? It's easy to forget, right? It's easy to neglect.
Well, when people are away and you don't have contact with them, it's easy
That's
to
right.
forget.
All right. Remember the prisoners as though in prison with them. That's really beautiful. It is. It's saying, don't do this because it's a Christian checklist, duty. No, you put yourself in their shoes. What would they feel like? Now, what kind of prisoner are we talking about? Someone that Paul, the great persecutor, has thrown in jail, who is threatening with either persecution or death itself if they don't deny Christ. They're in jail. Maybe they've been tormented, or they're about to be tormented, or they're just locked up and thrown away. Why would you not want to go to prison to visit them?
Because if you're associated, you might be the joint.
You'll be identified as, another Christian, and you might end up with them permanently. There's a lot of reason not to go visit them. Correct? And what does Jesus say through the Hebrew writer? You don't forget them. You act as though you're in there with them, and you go help them. Whew, okay, here I go. All right. Now, who's going to take care of it while you're on your way? It's going to be the Lord. Yes.
And it was so important then, not like now with our prisons now. I think prisons in Turkey are still almost like this in many cases.
Yeah.
That if you don't have someone to come visit you and pay attention to you and take care of your needs,
You're going to die often.
you just die there because you're
Yeah.
neglected by the people who run the prison.
There's a couple websites, and I thought I'd throw them up, but I said I'll wait for another time, that they deal with Christians in prison around the world. And because it really doesn't happen in America.